Hi everybody, so today I am going to do something that other booktubers call the mid-year freakout tag. So I have been doing booktube for a year this March, and I never did this last year. So what I'm going to do for this blog post is share what my answer was for this prompts for this year, and then do a time reverse to say what last year's prompt answer was. So, this year, my favorite new authors were very many because I just discovered the booktubers channels, Haley Pham, Sarah Caroli, Destiny Sidwell, Rachel Catherine in December, and then more recently, I have discovered these lyrics and lines, Jack Edwards and Sarah without an H. So I am constantly getting new recommendations, and these books that I am getting recommended, some recommendations from Jack Edwards will be reviewed in a different video, and then the other books that I have gotten recommended from Sarah without an H will also be recommended in another video sometime in the future. So my top two favorite new authors of this year are Sarah Adams and Leigh Bardugo. My favorite book so far that I have read by Sarah Adams is Practice Makes Perfect, which I gave 5 stars to on Goodreads and an A- letter grade ranking. I just loved the character pairing of Will and Annie. Practice Makes Perfect is the companion novel to When in Rome, which is set in the fictional town of Rome, Kentucky. In the first book, we meet Amelia Rose, who is a pop star whose car breaks down because she's like traveling to find some place to take a vacation to get away from being a pop star for a little bit, and she stays with this guy named Noah. Annie from the second book is one of Noah's sisters. I think she's the youngest sister, if I'm not mistaken. And the vibes of the town of Rome, Kentucky reminds me of Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls. And also, this kind of reminds me of Schitt's Creek too, When in Rome does, because the cover is of Amelia and Noah making food. And that makes me think of the whole dialogue between Moira and David when they're making enchiladas, and she's telling him to fold in the cheese. And then, obviously, the main pop star character's name is Amelia Rose, so that made me think of Alexis's character. And I'm not sure if Sarah Adams was inspired by Schitt's Creek when she wrote that book, but that's the vibe that I sort of got from it. So it's a good mixture between Schitt's Creek and Gilmore Girls, 2 shows I really love. And the other favorite author I have from this year is Leigh Bardugo, who wrote the Six of Crows duology, and her most recent release, which I have yet to read, is called The Familiar. I have really loved the Six of Crows duology. I just finished it a couple weeks ago. I read both books in about 3 days because the plot was so engaging, and I really enjoyed her writing. So I can't wait to read more books from her. And last year's answer to this prompt was Mimi Matthews, the author of the Bells of London trilogy. I read The Siren of Sussex last year, and this year I read The Belle of Belgrave Square, which I'll talk to in a little bit once I talk about favorite characters. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year is The Lost Book by Meg Schaefer, in January's, which is Olivia Blake's short story anthology, which is coming out at the beginning of October. The biggest surprise is Before I Let Go and This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. What really surprised me about these books is that I wasn't expecting the plots to focus so much on mental health and autism, and I really liked the representation that Kennedy Ryan gave to her characters in these books. In the first book, so both of the characters in these books are going through divorces. In the first book, it focuses more on going to therapy. The main character, Yasmin, really deals with depression a lot, and she goes to therapy, and I really loved how positively therapy was represented in this book. And then in the sequel, This Could Be Us, this book focuses on the second main female character in the friend group. Her name is no, I forget what her name is. This is bad. Okay, so I don't remember this character's name. It's not coming to me. But the main male character, Judah, he has 2 sons who have autism. And I really love how this author wrote these characters, because it's a very realistic representation of autism. Oh, wait. I have it written down. Let me look. I just entered the discussion questions for the second book. Soledad. Soledad is the main character that the second book focuses on. So I really like the buildup of the relationship between Soledad and Judah. Soledad is the one who is divorcing from her wife, Edward, because he cheated on her, and he's also in jail because he got arrested. So the second book in this series focuses on her relationship and her relationship with her daughters. And I just love the friendship bond between Soledad, Yasmin, and Hendrix, who the third book that is coming out in the fall is going to be based on. So I can't wait to read the third book, and I don't know when it's coming out, but that will be another anticipated release for me. The next prompt is biggest disappointment, and oh boy, did I have a lot of disappointments just in the past couple of weeks, actually, because that's when I read most of these books, at the end of April and beginning of May, or mid-April to mid-May. So the first book I wanted to talk is about is Iron Flame. Iron Flame is the sequel to Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I loved everything about Rebecca Yarros' first book, Fourth Wing. The disability representation for Violet's character, who I originally thought had cerebral palsy, but it's not cerebral palsy. It's some disability that I don't know the name of exactly, that's related to having brittle bones. Maybe it's called brittle bone disorder, I don't know. But still, the representation of Violet's disability was really good. The action was really good with all the dragon fighting and the war that was going on. And I just like the whole setting. It's like a mixture of Harry Potter and How to Train Your Dragon. So what made Iron Flame so disappointing for me was the first book really spent a lot of time building up the romance between Xaden and Violet. And going into the beginning of this year, Xaden and Violet were one of my favorite book couples, but they got demoted because of Iron Flame, because I thought that Xaden was so mean to Violet throughout the whole second book. I couldn't even finish Iron Flame because I just thought the whole romantic plot between Xaden and Violet was totally lost. So I had to DNF that Iron Flame at like 250 pages. The next book that was a biggest disappointment was Ruthless Vows, the sequel to the Divine Rivals book by Rebecca Ross. Divine Rivals was great. I love the world building. I love the romance, the romantic relationship buildup between Kit and I can't remember the girl's name. or was Kit the girl? I don't remember. But anyway, somehow I have a bad remembrance of all these characters' names, which isn't good. But, yeah, so basically, I felt Ruthless Vows focused too much on the war that was going on, and not so much the fantasy or the romance that the first book focused on. So I had to I also had to DNF this book because I did not enjoy it as much as I thought I was going to be. The next book in this prompt is The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. I went into this book really thinking I was going to like it. I had high hopes for it because I really liked Ren and Rome and Practice Makes Perfect. But I couldn't even get halfway through this book because I thought the shift in tone between the romantic leads halfway down the page just made things so friggin' confusing. So I had to DNF the book at 54%. It's just that really got overwhelming for me because I couldn't tell who was talking, and I just didn't really like the main female character, so I had to DNF. And the last book I wanted to talk about is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I got 140 pages into this book, and I had to DNF because I thought what the main character did was really, really sleazy by publishing her friend's book after she died, because she came off as sort of like racist, and I didn't really like that. So these books could also fit into the category in my Taylor Swift TBR, You Need to Calm Down, an overhyped book. The new release that I haven't read yet is Happily Never After by Lynn Painter, which I bought at Barnes & Noble's just now. So yeah, we just got home from going out to breakfast for Amanda's birthday, and Barnes & Noble's just opened up in Portland. So Matt and I went to the bookstore today, and I bought Happily Never After, which probably not, I shouldn't have, but so I'm looking forward to reading it and reviewing it in a later blog post. The next prompt for the mid-year freakout tag is newest fictional crush, and two characters that stood out to me this year so far was Jax from Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, and Dr. Matthew Vine III from At First Bite by Olivia Dade. So this book is about a plus-size woman named Athena who goes through depression, and the scene in this book that is the sweetest is when Matthew comforts Athena when he realizes that she's depressed. Like, I was crying through that scene because it was so sweet. So this book is a book I borrowed from my friend Kate a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, no. I borrowed this from her in March and still haven't given it back to her yet because I keep forgetting to return it, but I will give it back to her when I see her this week. But yeah, I really love Olivia Dade's writing, and I recently also finished her Spoiler Alert series, and my favorite book out of the trilogy was probably Shipwrecked. The next prompt I wanted to talk about is... Oh, so for last year's answer, there's this prompt. I didn't have any new fictional crushes until I read Love Theoretically in November because I fell in love with how Elsie and Jack were as a couple together and how sweet he was to her. My new favorite characters, I have several from books I have read recently, in fact. Anne from Anne of Green Gables, Emma from Emma, Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, and Julia from The Belle of Belgrave Square, and Anne from Persuasion. So yeah, I have really enjoyed all of these characters and how their relationships in their books build up with the romantic leads. Oh, I skipped one. Book that made you cry. I would have to say Little Women when Beth passes away, because even when I saw the play of Peacock Players in 2019, I was like a mess when I was watching the show and seeing it being acted out on stage, because it's just so... I just felt so bad for Jo, because she had to deal the closest with her sister dying, and that was hard for me to take. And a book that made me happy, rereading Harry Potter has made me happy, because I have not read it since I was in high school, and I decided to reread it, quite honestly, because it's my 20-year reunion this year, and I felt like to honor being graduated from high school for 20 years, I figured I would reread my favorite book series of the time and reminisce on the Harry Potter club that me and my friends Rachel and Samantha and Jen and Kim used to have. So if they're watching this video, I hope you guys remember that too and how much fun we had with that, and I hope to see you guys at the reunion in a few months. And now I wanted to get into some book superlatives that were inspired by Sarah without an H. The first superlative is favorite couples, and I could not pick one favorite couple. I have way too many, so I'm just going to list a few. The first is, of course, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Then we have Justin and Emma from Just from the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Lev and Sasha from One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. And just so people know, in case you missed my review of One for My Enemy when I read it back in February for my romance books reads for Valentine's Day. If you don't already know this, Romeo and Juliet is my favorite Shakespeare play of, like, all time. And One for My Enemy is basically a modernized retelling, except instead of it being set in Verona, it's set in New York City in modern day. And we have a family of witches and a family of warlocks who are, like, feuding families living in New York City, like, having their own businesses and competing to sell stuff. So we have Lev, who is Romeo, Romeo's modern character, and Sasha, who is Juliet's character. And I obviously love the build-up between Lev and Sasha, but also a couple of the older siblings in this book have a romantic relationship going on too, and I thought the build-up between their relationships was really good as well. And then the final favorite couple is Miles and Daphne from Funny Story. And in my video I did at the end of April, where I reviewed anticipated reviews, I reviewed Funny Story and Just for the Summer. And I mentioned that Miles and Daphne are my favorite couple from my second favorite couple from an Emily Henry book after January and Gus from Beach Read. Beach Read is back on the bookshelf. I don't have it in here. Okay, so the next superlative prompt is these characters. These characters that I listed for favorite couples also fit the favorite characters prompt. So the next prompt I wanted to talk about is not my favorite, but would recommend. So for this book, I'm going to talk about books that I rated 2.5 to 3.5 stars. There are books that I didn't particularly like very much, but if you would like to read them and share your thoughts with me on them, you are more than welcome to. The first one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I read in... No, wait, that's Emily Bronte. Which I read in February along with Wuthering Heights. So I loved the beginning of Jane Eyre and being introduced to Jane's character. I loved Jane's character. I just thought the relationship buildup with her romantic interest was way too slow, and I just got bored. So again, this book was a DNF. The second book that was not my favorite is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Sarah Caroli hyped up this book on her YouTube channel. She read it in January. So my problem with this book was the character of Addie seemed very whiny, and she didn't really seem like she appreciated anybody. So I just found her character to be not likable at all. And I had to DNF because I just found her to be whiny and unrelatable. And also, I had gone into this book with high expectations because of seeing it reviewed on Sarah's video, and having read This Savage Song and Our Dark Duet in February, and Buddy Ringing with my friend Kate, and giving that duology a 4-star rating, I was really excited to read another book by V.E. Schwab. And I was disappointed in this book because I was just expecting a lot more from it. The next book I wanted to talk about for this list, for this prompt, is The Shining by Stephen King. So I guess why I found this book to be a bit disappointing was because it is listed on Goodreads as a horror. And I was going into it thinking it was going to be really, really scary. The plot twists in it were fine. It was engaging. But I just thought it was going to be scarier than it actually turned out to be. To me, it was more like a thriller and not really horror. I love the setting of the Overlook Hotel. Danny is one of my favorite child characters, aside from Waylay from Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score, and Ruby from the Bright Falls series by Ashley Herring Blake. But yeah, I just didn't find this book to be scary. And I was really hoping that the main female character would take his son away from her abusive husband. But that, spoiler alert, does not happen. And the next book in this list is Tuck Everlasting. So this was another reread for me. I had previously read it probably as a kid, but then I reread it again 2 years ago when I was preparing for the PTA play audition for Tuck Everlasting. And here's the program from the play that I was in. So my favorite characters from Tuck Everlasting are Hugo, who is played by my friend Rachel April, who is graduating this year from high school. Happy graduation, Rachel. And then my other favorite character was Constable Joe, who was played by my friend Oliver Frades. And then I loved Molly Muck Belanger as Jesse Tuck. He and my friend Beth Pierce had really good chemistry together in their scenes, especially in the song Partners in Crime. I love how I am reviewing a show I was in like 2 years ago, but just in case you missed the review when I originally did it, I figured I would talk about it again while I review the book. The book itself I find to be pretty bland and boring. So when I was in the play, I was originally not sure how I was going to like the theatrical adaptation of the book, but I ended up really enjoying being on stage and seeing how Natalie Babbitt's characters were brought to life. And I think whoever wrote the script for the musical did a really good job with doing this, because obviously I was more engaged in the musical than I was in the book, because the book was boring. And even though it's short, I wanted to really DNF it because the plot takes a long time to develop, and Winnie is just a brat, and I don't like her. So, Tuck Everlasting is more of a middle grade novel for like 4th through 6th graders. So, I would highly recommend that if you have any kids in that age group, that they should read this book. Or if you're an adult who likes to be nostalgic and read books from when you were a kid, you should definitely check this book out. But it is not one of my top favorites. I gave it 3.5 stars on Goodreads. the final book for this prompt is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So, this book was featured on the episode of Friends, the one with Ross's Sandwich, where Phoebe and Rachel are taking the class at the new school. And they read this book and they read Jane Eyre. And there is so much irony in that, because I wonder if when the producers of Friends were writing this episode back in the 1990s, they noticed some similarities between the romantic leads in this book, Catherine and Heathcliff, and related them to how toxic Ross and Rachel's relationship is, because that's the connection that I made, and that's what made me stop reading the book, because I know that Ross eventually matures by the end of the series, but overall, he's my least favorite character, and he just really annoys the crap out of me. I have gone on and on about this in other videos, so I'm not going to talk about it here, like, at all, because I don't want to bore you guys, because I've talked about that enough. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about for this prompt is the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas. So this series was really hyped up by Haley and Sarah and Destiny and Rachel. And I love the first book. I love the world building. I love that it was a modern day retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And the fact that it was a modern day retelling of Beauty and the Beast was what made me pick it up in the first place. The second book, however, I could not get into. I had to DNF it after page 250 because A, it was too long, B, there were too many sex scenes, and C, the war talk was getting confusing for me. So, yeah. And finally, books that I would not recommend, more DNFs. Betting on You by Lynn Painter. I had to DNF this book because I didn't like the idea of, like, betting on other people's relationships, for one thing. And the male main character was a bully to the main female character, because he called her glasses, because she wore glasses, which I hated because I wore glasses. And I know that if I were, like, treated like that by somebody, I wouldn't like to be treated that way. I certainly wouldn't date him. The next book that I wanted to mention for this prompt was Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the fourth book in a series of standalone books that are historical fiction books, which focus on this book, Malibu Rising, which I gave 4 stars to, and also Daisy Jones and the Six, which I am currently rereading, which I gave 5 stars to. What I did not, and also The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I gave 4 stars to. I gave Carrie Soto's Back 2.75 to 3 stars, mostly because it's about a tennis player who's coming out of retirement because she's jealous of an up-and-coming tennis player who's trying to beat her record and wants to compete against them because she wants to prove she's still the best. I DNF'd this because I think tennis is a boring sport and I just wasn't getting engaged in the book. And the next book that is in this prompt is Mr. Wrong Number. I DNF'd this book because the couple was not relatable, the main female character was annoying, and I didn't like the miscommunication trope. The next book is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otesha Moshfegh. I think I picked a bad time to read this book because I read it immediately after finishing listening to the audiobook of Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. And basically, this book is about a 20-year-old girl who's rich and lives in New York City, and her parents die, and she basically takes a year off from everything happening in her life to sleep, that's why the book is called My Year of Wrestling Relaxation. And her doctor puts her on a lot of, like, drugs. And, like, the amount of drugs she's taken could probably have killed her, but they didn't. I think the timing of reading this book was not that good for me, because as I just said, a couple of days before I started reading this book, I had finished listening to the audiobook for Matthew Perry's memoir. Obviously, in Matthew Perry's memoir, he talks about how he dealt with addiction for his whole entire life, and, like, I just connected too many things going on with this main character, and connected them to what Matthew Perry was talking about his drug addiction. So that was a no for me. And then the final book in this prompt is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, like One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. This is a modern day retelling of Romeo and Juliet. It is set in Shanghai, China, during the start or height of a medical pandemic. And I had to stop reading this book because I felt like it didn't really focus on the Romeo and Juliet retelling, and it was way too focused on the dealing with the pandemic. And because I felt the pandemic going on in this book was too closely related to COVID-19, even though the illness was not named. I just couldn't deal with that, so I had to stop reading. So thank you for tuning into my mid-year freakout tag video. Thank you for the prompts for the book tags to various booktubers, and for the superlatives to Sarah without an H. Have a great day.